And we are on. Welcome to the Liberty Lunch Power Hour. I am Dan Fishman. It is my pleasure to introduce the president of the People for Liberty, Lauren Postler.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much. This is kind of a fun role reversal for the last, not quite a year. I think we're just under a year. We launched in May, June of last year during really the big kind of presidential and election push. But since that time, it's mostly been me. And we had the benefit of working together with you. You've been hosting these Liberty Lunch Power Hours. So it's been a super fun ride. I've loved watching you. I think that you really helped to embody some of our values from People for Liberty, which really, as a nonprofit organization, we are a 501c4. Our goal is to help create a warm, welcoming, diverse, and inclusive community for the Liberty movement. And we'll certainly talk about this, I'm sure, but what I found kind of early on, again, spring of last year, as I was exploring the party, getting to learn more about the movement, was there weren't a lot of opportunities and organizations devoted specifically to building community, to nurturing community. I was very impressed with the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian National Committee, which is where we connected. And the work really preparing candidates and working with candidates and state affiliates and chapters. But when I looked around kind of the ecosystem of organizations within the Liberty movement, I didn't find what I was looking for. I was looking for a group, an organization that could help me learn. And not just learn on my own through a website, because I think the lp.org and then some other resources online do a great job about sharing thought leadership and facts and the platform and the principles, and all of that was great. But I wanted to connect with people with whom I related and talk and explore. And People for Liberty launched around that idea. I was invited by a good friend here in Houston, Texas, Liz Coleman, who was already more involved in the party, who had reached out to me. And she said, hey, I want to create some Facebook groups and get people talking about this Joe Jorgensen as a candidate. And I said, okay, I got a background in nonprofit management and community development and building and supporting communities. I said, I want to help with that. That's something that I was seeking personally. I wanted to solve my own problem. So launching our Facebook groups and then eventually building an organization around that to support the people of the Liberty movement has really been a true grassroots evolution. And today, I'm really excited to share with our audience, our community, that you, my friend, have agreed to come on board as our executive director. So Dan, continuing in that vein, this was a really organic evolution. And I think you and I really connecting and being on the same page about what we saw as kind of gaps within the Liberty movement and the need and how People for Liberty could help, meet or reach, solve that need.
Yeah.
That's where it made sense. I want to hear from you.
Well, so I really appreciate it. It's interesting having been in the maelstrom. Obviously, I was the executive director of the Libertarian Party for the previous 2 years, including, essentially a year of COVID, a virtual convention where we managed to nominate Joe Jorgensen to be our presidential candidate, and then the hybrid convention where we were able to elect Joe Bishop Henchman as our new chair and elect a new LNC. And during all of that time, I was very aware of the fact that the number one criticism, of course, every job that you're in, you're going to get criticism. The number one criticism is, why aren't you guys focusing on this? Why aren't you guys focusing on that? And the fact of the matter is, there's so much stuff that the Libertarian Party itself, LPHQ, which has to do, the very difficult business of maintaining 50 state ballot access, organizing all the various candidacies, working with the various states to help them to grow. LPHQ has a tremendous amount of stuff that needs to get done. And there is a need for helper organizations to facilitate that. Now, I come from the tech background, same as you.
Yep.
And one of the things that I know that a lot of people don't know is that the way the internet became as amazing as it is that some of the big players found ways to grow other people in the industry.
Yes.
What's sometimes referred to as an incubator.
Yep.
And when I saw that you had written that you wanted People for Liberty to be an incubator for the liberty movement, I'm like, she's speaking my language. And so I'm very excited to come in at that level and start saying, all these people, all the people who are like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that for liberty? They're right. Those things all need to be spoken on. I want to find a way to facilitate other people getting some of those things done.
Yes. Well, and Dan, that brings us back to how this was a grassroots evolution and movement. I may be the founder of the official organization, but I certainly was not the sole person responsible. This was a team effort, and it was amazing grassroots volunteers. I mentioned Liz Coleman, her partner, Elliot Sherman, who was a candidate here in Texas.
For Congress in Houston.
For Congress, Casey Daly, Ryan Thompson, Stephanie Diaz. It was a grassroots effort. And what I said to them was, we have to find a way to incubate or to support more of these grassroots efforts. And we really leaned into that with the Let Her Speak movement and supporting that grassroots movement. But that was the idea. And Dan, you and I both agreed that there are amazing people, right? People within the liberty movement doing amazing things. How can we support them?
Well, and the thing about it is that, when we say within the liberty movement, there are a lot of people who are working in the liberty movement who don't realize they actually are in the liberty movement.
Absolutely.
Okay? All the people who are working for marriage equality, all that time, they were working in the liberty movement. All the people who are working for legalizing cannabis, the people who are working for criminal justice reform, the people working to end the death penalty.
Yes.
Those are our allies. And finding a way to connect those people and support them and to say, look, we're libertarians. We're supporting what you're actively doing. And we want to help grow your movement. We want to help you be more successful.
Yes.
That is a critical need right now for the Libertarian Party. And so I'm very excited for the idea that we are going to be doing outreach that isn't necessarily done, that can't be done by the Libertarian Party.
Correct.
And isn't done by a lot of libertarians because they're not aware, or a lot of times we are sucked into, as libertarians, internal facing libertarian issues. And I don't want to minimize those, and I don't want to say that they're not important, but to have a group that says, we are specifically not interested in internal Libertarian Party politics.
Yes.
Because People for Liberty, we don't care about the internal politics of the Libertarian Party. We want to see the Libertarian Party succeed. I am a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party. But in terms of, which caucus is in charge or who's running the party, anything like that, we don't care about that. We just want a world that is set free in our lifetime. And so it's critical that there be a group that says, we want to grow the liberty movement among people who don't necessarily currently identify with the Libertarian Party, but who would never use force for economic or political gain.
Yes. Yes. Dan, I think this is a great opportunity to share a little bit more about your background and how you came to the liberty movement. You mentioned, your background's in tech. I work in tech as well.
Yeah.
When you dedicated, your life and your service to helping us build a world set free in our lifetime, how was your journey coming to the movement, which happened before the party?
Well, I'm going to tell a story that I have never told. And this is a good one because people who have been around me for a long time know almost all of my stories. But so when I was a kid, I went to nursery school in Albany, New York. And I'm one of those people, I have a weird, accurate memory. I can remember things from when I was 2 years old really well. I remember this thing, nursery school, I was in a carpool. And, the moms took turns driving us off to nursery school. And one day we were driving back and I was playing with my seatbelt in the back seat. And fooling around with it. And the woman, and this at that age, this is 1972,
Yeah.
1971. There's no car seats.
Yeah.
So I'm playing around with the seatbelt, and I take it off and I put it on. I'm just playing around with it. And the woman who's driving turns around and yells at me. She says, "Daniel Fishman, if you don't fasten that seatbelt right now, I'm going to pull the car over and you can walk home." I'm like, oh my God. And I closed it. But that night I was seething. Like, she's not the boss of me. I can do whatever I want. And so I made plans. And the next day we're driving in the car and I am deliberately playing with the seatbelt so that she can see. She says, "Daniel Fishman, if you don't stop right now." And so I keep going and I'm playing with the seatbelt, and she pulls the car over and I open the door and I bolt and I just run off.
Oh my God.
Of course. Exactly. So, it's another nightmare for her. I went into people who know Albany. There was the Price Chopper. I ran into the Price Chopper, and then I'm in a store and I'm there with food, and this is awesome. And so I'm sitting around. Exactly. I'm sitting around and I see the grapes. And so I go and get some grapes, and I'm just sitting there eating grapes. And then the stock boys find me and they run me down. My mom had to take a cab to come get me. Yeah. And we were kicked out of the carpool. So all sorts of consequences. But I like to say that my libertarian roots are deep, even as a kid.
Yeah. I think that will not only speak to many, many, many parents, but it says to me that we're born with a liberty mindset. This is something that is inherent in each of us as humans.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. So I was a little better behaved through the rest of my childhood. Not a lot. I mean, anybody who knew me, a little. Well, I'll tell you, all my childhood friends often say, we never knew. We never knew. Like, you were never going to do something crazy, like you weren't going to turn to a life of crime or anything like that. But a lot of times, if people told you couldn't do something, you just do it.
That was
it. And so to that extent, when I went away to school, I started thinking about, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And one of the things that I did was I was living relatively independently in college. I was at University of Texas for Austin. And I started working to support myself. And in a crazy space, I started working at a residential treatment center in Liberty Hill, Texas. Actually, residential psychiatric hospital. And it was really fascinating to be there. We used to say that the staff were actually doing therapy in 8-hour shifts because we got to see a lot of kids with a lot of really difficult issues, but everybody's got some piece of that in there. And for me, it really helped me to find a lot of peace and clarity in terms of what I wanted to do. And I found that I identified a lot with these kids and I really had a great rapport. So I ended up becoming a special education teacher. Yep. I did that for 7 years. I moved to Massachusetts in 1994 and taught 2 more years there. I ended up, my last population, I was working with severe autistic students. It was fantastic. I woke up every day thinking, yes, work today. And then I was in a relationship with a woman where I thought we were going to get married and have kids. And as caveman as it may be of me to say this, I thought, man, must provide for family. And it wasn't going to happen on a special education teacher salary. At the time, this is 1995, in Massachusetts, I was making $16,000 a year. Yeah, exactly. It was just brutal. And I mean, Massachusetts is expensive too. So I went back to school, got a computer science degree. As it turns out, the mid-90s was not the worst time to get a computer science degree. I ended up working for a company called anyday.com. Libertarians can have a lot of debates about intellectual property and patents. But if you want to believe the patents, my team and I invented the internet calendar, as well as the method of syncing information between a mobile device and the internet.
This is for Palm, right?
Yeah, exactly. Palm. Well, so Anyday was a startup. Anyday got bought by Palm. But before that, we actually had invented the syncing process, which was, now we don't even think twice about it, right?
Yeah.
You put your address book in anywhere, you edit it online, but that was awesome. I really enjoyed that.
Well,
2000, the
and
.com crash. Go
I'll
ahead.
say, Dan, this was your journey in the startup world, which you and I share, and where this incubator idea came from. So that's an important pivotal point in your
Right.
journey. Yeah.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing about it is that Massachusetts was a great community for that as well. A lot of really huge startups came out of the Boston area. Silicon Valley as well has to do with the collection of great schools. But I got to see a lot of other friends too, and I became aware of one of the critical elements of libertarianism, which is that there's this great book called The Fatal Conceit, in which Hayek talks about. If you look at this amazing world that we live in, and I'm going to paraphrase a bit, internet on your telephone, right? The sum of human knowledge. Here we are, exactly, right. We're on a video conference. You're in Houston. I'm in Washington, D.C. All these amazing things that have happened. And the idea that any central planned government could have gotten us to this place, it's laughable. But that is the fatal conceit that government can do things like this. When in reality, in the startup world, what you see is that failure, lots and lots of failure, is the precursor to success.
Yes.
The most successful companies that are out there are successful because they had lots of competitors who failed.
Yep.
And striving to be better than them is what made this work. I mean, I'm preaching the free market. It's not a revolutionary concept to libertarians, but sometimes it is to the people that we're trying to reach. And that's what People for Liberty wants to talk about. And one of the critical things about it is that people don't realize, like there's a lot of people who have been in the liberty movement and they are dejected because they tried to do this or they tried to do that, and they didn't change the world. And I can tell you, as somebody who's been very active in the Libertarian Party for 9 years, and active for much longer than that, I do occasionally think to myself, we haven't really changed the world yet. We haven't had the success that I would have liked to. But I will say this, and to all the liberty people who are out there now, and this is an appropriate message for Black History Month, we only have to look back at other people struggling for liberty and justice. And then if we say that we're getting down on ourselves because we haven't been successful yet, look at what they did.
Yes. Look at other movements. Look at other movements, the struggle and the generational barriers they have had to overcome. I think that's absolutely appropriate, that in any society, there are movements that take time.
Right. And so that's the critical thing about it. And finding the success in those movements, you can look back at the civil rights movement and you can look at various different branches of it. Some of them were successful and some of them failed. It's the multitude of attacks, the multitude of variety,
Yes.
all the different things working together that ends up coming out with a message that works. And all those different things affect the leader as well. Like, I mean, you look at, any company that is successful now in technology, they're not doing exactly the same thing that they were doing 20 years ago.
They've evolved.
Exactly. You have to be nimble, because somebody comes in and they try to innovate their way ahead of you, and you either have to innovate or die.
Yep.
And the tech field is littered with people who didn't innovate. But you look at some companies, one of my favorite stories is Facebook. I remember very clearly when Mark Zuckerberg, who, controversial figure, a lot of libertarians got zucked recently. I think Lauren, exactly. However, when he started Facebook, he had a vision for what it was going to be. And like 2000, I want to say it's 2006, might be 2007. And I remember this because I'd come from the startup space. Yahoo offered him $1 billion.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
For Facebook.
Yep.
And he turned them down. And the technorati, the media went crazy.
Like so many articles, everyone had opinions.
Exactly. How arrogant can you be? Blah, 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 blah. But as it turns out, right, he was innovating. And even then, he was constantly changing Facebook. Facebook, we all saw the movie. It started off as essentially Hot or Not for the Harvard campus.
Yep. Yep.
And then it morphed into including, likes and pokes, and then it had apps and games and all these other things. I've heard it said that there are more people playing games because of Facebook
Yep.
than almost any other app. All that stuff, you see that innovation being nimble, and Facebook kept changing and adapting. The
Well,
liberty movement has to be like that.
and I'll say that was over a span of 20 years. I was one of those first classes at UT Austin signing up for Facebook with my college email account. And
Right.
I remember, recognizing technology as a means to scale. And when we
Right.
think about social movements and that evolution, it takes time. I mean, Facebook didn't become this behemoth, and we all have opinions. I have some pretty strong opinions over, the span of just maybe a few years. So the
Right.
Libertarian Party, which has been, working behind the scenes, I think, Dan, to your point, to some extent, they've been one of the only organizations, and a movement can't rely on one organization that is focused on one thing.
Right. And yeah, the critical thing about it is that, one of the things that drew me to People for Liberty in the very beginning is the name is perfect. It's about people.
Yes.
And that's, to go back to tech, we see everything in tech that succeeded happened because they built communities, but
Yes.
it's not one unified community. It allows people to build their own. And so,
Yes.
one of the fascinating things among People for Liberty is I'm going to say there's 18 active Facebook groups, up to 20. I can count pretty accurately. Take my shoes off to get there, but we can say that no liberty group has to be like any other liberty group. Okay. If your big jam is cannabis, there are liberty groups for you, but your big jam might be parental rights. Okay. Your issue might be gambling, whatever it is. There is a place and a movement within People for Liberty for you. Now, the Libertarian Party, they're working to elect candidates. You can see, get the world set free, all that stuff. They're not a social club.
Correct.
There is a need, though, to gather people, like-minded people together and get us all working towards the issues that are important to us, because that's where we're the most effective. We're the most effective on the issues that speak to us. And, I like to think I'm a relatively broad libertarian, but where you'll hear me get passionate is when you talk about technology issues and liberty, how, the ability for the state to surveil us now is so much greater. And most people don't realize how strong AI is at doing stuff like that. And so those are things that that's like what I really, when I start talking about that, you'll see me start really getting animated, stuff like that.
And Dan, I'll jump in there. We started on Facebook groups, and we've certainly recognized that there is a need to grow, beyond that, to incorporate other platforms, but also incorporate being in person. Do you want to share with people maybe our strategic plan and talk about what you are excited about stepping in now as the executive director, and where we see the organization going and growing from here?
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good idea. Let me pop that up.
And while you're working on that, I'll share with people listening. We're going to be doing some FAQs about Dan. So we want y'all to get to know him a little bit better. So if you are not currently following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we are at People and the number 4 Liberty. And we want you to get to know Dan as our new leader. We want you to get to know the values that he holds dear, and why we thought he was such a great fit. But today we really wanted to focus on the future and what we're excited about and what you guys are excited about and finding out from you. So
right. That's a critical thing. I see we've got quite a few people watching along. You're welcome to stick questions in. I see that we have a criticism of Mark Zuckerberg, totally appropriate. Although let's hope that he doesn't cut us off in midstream on Facebook. So, one of the things about the strategic plan that I really have liked is that the focus on it being People for Liberty means that there's not any one path. And, there are times within the Libertarian Party that we have the no true Scotsman, no true libertarian, something like that. People for Liberty, we don't care about that. As long as you meet the definition, right? Exactly. there's two important words there, right? We're not going to argue about whether or not you're libertarian. As long as you meet the definition that you fall into the group of people, you should be a member of our group.
If you are human, if you support liberty, we want to talk.
Yeah. One of the things that I used to say on the campaign trail is that, Republicans and Democrats say, oh, we want to grow. We want to become a big tent party, a big tent Republican, big tent Democrat. Libertarians, we don't believe in that idea.
Yeah.
We say, if you think you ought to be able to look up and see the stars and reach for them, you're a libertarian. No tent covering your view or anything like that. It should be wide open. And so what we want is to help grow the community of people who are effective at spreading that message. And when I say you ought to be able to look up and see the stars, I'm not talking about any specific political issue or anything like that. We're talking about finding a way to achieve the personal liberty that you want in your life. And, it's an interesting thing too. Not everybody wants the same level of personal liberty in their lives.
Yes, very true.
And that's okay. There are some people who say, you know what? I would like to have somebody else help me manage my finances.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? There is a community of people that you can pay to help you to manage your finances. There are some people who want to control their own healthcare. Say, you know what? I'm going to keep track of all this. There are other people who are like, you know what? I'd rather go to a healthcare professional, get regular checkups, stuff like that, do those things. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, you do you. And I think that's the beauty of the liberty movement, that we are dedicated to removing barriers.
Right.
For you to live your life as you see fit, for you to govern yourself and your liberties.
Right. And so one of the things that's critical to me is the team that, you had assembled, and you being especially effective at this. The Let Her Speak campaign was so great. It was so focused. And it really caught fire.
Shout out to Casey Daly. I will say that was her brainchild, and that grassroots team that she developed, we just supported.
Right. And that's perfect. And that's exactly what it was. And, the last bullet point here is, I think, the most important point, that it's data driven. Okay.
Exactly.
We're looking to find a way to say, we can find out what's successful. What is a successful messaging? And
let's learn.
One of the things also is that, because we're looking at it from a commercial standpoint. So for the Libertarian Party, or for any political party, you look at what you do. And if you irritate 40% of your members, that's a problem.
Yeah, let's learn from that. Let's do that.
But for a group that's reaching out, one sliver of the People for Liberty pie, it doesn't matter who they irritate, as long as there's the core number of people who they approve of that. And we can grow much more effectively. We can grow the party. And, that's something that I want to state, that's a clear part of my path. I want to help the Libertarian Party grow. We want to help it succeed. I want to bring in people into the Libertarian Party, people who don't necessarily see their home there yet. And that's one of the things that I loved about what we're talking about. We're talking about engaging people, finding a way to say, we hear you. We hear what you're talking about. Your issue is the most important issue to you. And we want to treat it that way. Okay.
Yes.
We don't want to try to tell you, well, you can complain about that, but really you should be more concerned about getting Ross Ulbricht out of jail right now or whatever else. If somebody tells us what their issue is, that's what we want to focus on.
And free Ross, we definitely support that. But to your point, every person, all of the people who identify as seeking some kind of liberty in their daily lives, they're going to have different priorities, and we embrace and support that. And we want to help support you in seeking access to those liberties and breaking down those barriers that are impeding you.
Yeah. And that's the critical thing about it, is that the People for Liberty, we are really excited about the fact that we truly believe that everybody is at least libertarian leaning, if you're not libertarian already. And I think that that's a fair statement to say.
Since you were a toddler, you have been seeking liberty. You have been rebelling against your parents. You've been rebelling against the system. At some point along the line, we all determined that there was some level of support that we wanted and needed. And
Yeah.
I think this is where kind of that self-awareness and learning comes into play as we all become adults, right? What is the kind of support that I want and that I need? And
Right.
that's from your parents or a system or an institution. In the liberty movement, we have identified that the less government support or involvement, the better.
Right. And I think one of the things that people I hit the wrong button there, but one of the things that have a little bit of a conversation here, people lose track of sometimes is that, there is this movement in both the Republican and the Democratic Party where they say liberty for me, but not for thee. Okay.
Yes.
Democrats support this idea that, as long as you're willing to go along with what they want, sure, do whatever you want. But if you want to do something that they don't approve of, yeah,
Mm-mm.
exactly. And to me, that's always seemed crazy because what we're talking about is a very principal idea, right? There's two sides of the liberty coin. One is liberty, and the other side is tolerance. And
And
unless you're practicing, yeah, unless you're practicing tolerance, nobody else has liberty. They can only do what you approve of. And
yes.
tolerance is specifically saying you get to do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting me.
Yeah.
And, as much as I might not like those body piercings that you're having, or the way that you've
Well, that
groomed
means
yourself,
yeah.
exactly, any of those things, as long as you get to do all that stuff, because I have to be tolerant of it. And one of the things that I used to say in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is just the most democratic state ever, super blue. I used to occasionally troll Democrats, and I would say to them, I'm like, so are you a tolerant person? And they're like, of course I'm tolerant. I've supported marriage equality since forever. I'm like, but in Massachusetts, that's not really anything. I mean, 90% of the people in Massachusetts support marriage equality. What do you think about people owning guns? Oh, wow. I'm like, but if they're not hurting anybody,
Yeah.
right? I mean, don't you have to be tolerant of their behavior? And like, well, no, because there's a potential. I'm like, potential. I mean, there's a potential for everything. Tolerance is the idea that people get to do what they want, and waking people up to that. I have truly enjoyed doing that.
Well, and Dan, I think that this is a great, opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of the broad principles of the liberty movement because we recognize that not everyone's going to identify as a voting libertarian. That's okay.
Yep.
People for Liberty is dedicated to the principles of the movement and providing a space for you to explore that.
I had a conversation about that exactly this morning. That exact phrase came up where I said, if you voted for a Republican or a Democrat because you thought they were the best candidate,
Yep.
we don't think that makes you a bad
That's
person.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The critical thing is that in your personal life, have you ever used force for political or economic gain? And most people are like, no, of course not. I would never do that. Exactly. You would never do that.
Yeah.
And the question that we're asking you is that if you would never do that, why would you authorize your government to do it in your name?
Yes.
And when people start to make that connection, we start to win. But that's a long step to get to. And it's even harder if we say, well, if you voted for Donald Trump, you're a terrible person. Or if you voted for Joe Biden, you're a sheep. Any of these things that we hear too many libertarians pushing forward. The idea is that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you've done, as long as you're committed to this basic idea, I am not going to use force to get what I want.
Yes.
You've subscribed to the most important part of libertarianism. And why should we be embarrassed? Why should we be ashamed to say that's what we're focused on?
Yep.
That we are trying to get everybody to agree to this sort of, it's not even like a kumbaya message because it's so fundamentally simple. Don't hit people. Don't take their stuff.
Don't take their stuff. Again, going back to toddlers, the principles and the premise upon which this movement was founded comes back to very basic human nature. And Dan, you and I agreed in a lot of ways. We both work in tech now. Your background was in special education. My background was in social work. We came to tech because we saw it was a means to scale the social impact we hope to see in the world. But when you come back to those basic premises of human evolution, behavior, and psychology, the liberty movement is saying we embrace those instead of creating artificial barriers, rules, and regulations that impede your ability to be that human and live the best life you're possible.
Right. And I think that that's the thing about it is to live the best life possible. And only you get to say what that is.
Yes.
Right. If you're there. I know a lot of people who their best life possible is being a parent. That's what they want to do. If that's what you want to do, find a way to make it happen.
Yes.
Go for it. I know a lot of people who are leading childless lives. If that's what they choose to do, there's nothing wrong with that. People make the decisions that are right for them. And, there's all sorts of, we can talk about, society's pressures of, oh, this is what you see in Hollywood and stuff like that. Those things, you can't get away from them. People are going to have opinions. They're going to talk about them, stuff like that. But the government should never be advocating for a lifestyle.
Correct.
One of the things that kills me right now is that to this day, even though we have achieved marriage equality, get my quotes in there, marriage equality in the United States, there is still this idea that the government sanctions a marriage.
Yes.
Why?
Why?
I mean, because
involved.
Right. For the longest time, we had this idea of holy matrimony. If you watch an old movie, you say, I now join you together in holy matrimony. That's an idea of a church saying, this is how we have a commitment ceremony.
Yes.
This is what we're doing. If people want to do that, that's fine. It is imbued with as much power as people choose to give it.
Well, so Dan, let's talk about kind of back this out, because I think this touches on a lot of issues where people think that they would be at odds with the Libertarian Party. So I'll use for an example, I'm Catholic.
Yep.
I am uber Catholic. I am very Catholic. And there seems to be this idea or understanding that, oh, well, then you don't support marriage equality, or that you don't support access to abortion, or that you don't do this or this or this. Wait a minute. What I don't support is the government having a say in how I live my life and how you live your life. But that means that I get to choose how to ascribe based on my faith.
Right.
That everyone should have the opportunity to live their life based on their faith or lack of faith or their chosen lifestyle, and that the government does not dictate. That doesn't mean that I don't still ascribe to those values as a Catholic, but that's my choice, and the government does not create barriers.
And I think when that message is communicated effectively,
yes,
we succeed. In fact, the first state to, I know Hawaii legalized marriage equality, but the state that passed the law that made it to the Supreme Court and legalized it everywhere was Massachusetts.
Yep.
So having lived there, having grown up in Texas, Massachusetts is a hardcore Catholic state.
Yep.
Okay. And it is to the point that there are some holidays that, for example, St. Patrick's Day, right? You couldn't actually have St. Patrick's Day be a statewide holiday because it's a religious holiday.
Yeah.
However, in Massachusetts, they went back through the history book and they found out that March 17th is also the day that the British evacuated Boston. So March 17th is now celebrated as Evacuation Day, and they happen to have a parade for St. Patrick.
As an Irish Catholic, I support that. Yes.
Super Catholic. However,
yeah.
when they were brought to the thing and marriage equality was brought before the people of Massachusetts, the governor at the time was Mitt Romney. And there was a lot of people were afraid that it was going to be overturned in a popular ballot because so many Catholics were against it. And he said, you guys need to understand the First Amendment. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no laws respecting an institution of religion. And what that means is that although we have marriage equality, there will never be a law that says that Catholic priests have to marry people that they don't want to marry.
Yeah.
Okay. Churches get to choose for themselves.
Yes.
That's the critical aspect of it. And that's the liberty. And taking marriage away from government, and it's even codified, right? I mean, I like the fact that government can take things that they're doing that are terrible and then find a way to combine them with more government and to make them worse.
Yes.
So the fact that there is, taxes, that's bad. Government support of marriage, that's bad. But then there's actually a penalty for being married in your taxes. Because government is crazy.
Yes.
And so those are the simple things about it, that when we talk about what we want people to do, we want them to just say, I want more liberty in my lives. And I find this small aspect of it. And we're content with that because we know once you see this part of liberty, and we can quote Dr. King on this, right?
Yes.
A battle against injustice anywhere is a battle for justice everywhere. And my other favorite Dr. King quote, that the arc of history is long, but it tends towards justice. Okay, that's what will happen, is that if we let people see how they can get more liberty in their lives and they enhance it,
Yep.
they're going to want everybody else to have that as well.
So Dan, I think this is a great segue. I don't know if you can pull back up that slideshow, but talking about some of the ways that we feel People for Liberty can support people in that journey. And I do want to share as you're pulling that back up, within the liberty movement, I might be Catholic, but Dan isn't. And our friend, Spike Cohen is Jewish. And I have found wonderful, amazing friends who are pagan, who are Muslim, who are atheist, who are agnostic. And where we all were able to come together is that recognition that government shall not create a barrier.
Right. When I was running on in Massachusetts, in the North Shore, I lived in Beverly, which is one town north of Salem. So when I ran for Congress, I had a ton of Wiccan support. People are like, awesome. We really appreciate what you're going out there and saying, all this stuff, because you're not preaching fake tolerance. You're preaching actual real tolerance for whatever lifestyle people want to lead. And it's totally fine. So it is one of the interesting things about it. And actually, I talk a little bit, let you have this slide, because this is part of your brainchild about how we're setting up a structure that facilitates success.
Yep. So I'll share that this being part of my brainchild was very much inspired by the people. So when I was interviewing people and soliciting feedback over our Facebook groups and talking to people about the need that we saw and kind of the gaps or the white space in the liberty movement that wasn't currently being filled, it became really obvious really fast, because I'm also a fundraiser, that there was not a super PAC that was active outside of presidential election years. So the super PACs that I understood were active within the Libertarian Party were specific for one candidate or a caucus or a cause. And there was no super PAC that was running kind of in the background as a fundraising organization and as an organization that was understanding the data we were collecting and the marketing information. So when I was considering how People for Liberty could best be of service to the movement, first and foremost was the 501c4. The nonprofit, and the distinction between a C3 and a C4 is that a C4 organization, thanks to the IRS and taxes, is allowed to expend up to 49% of their budget and their activities on, again, activities related to political action and advocacy.
Right. They define them as social welfare groups, right?
Correct. So as a 501c4, we, as a nonprofit, are allowed to engage in legislative advocacy, supportive campaigns, and candidates up to a certain degree. Now, there are very distinct limitations, and I'm happy to nerd out on that with anyone who's interested. But the other piece of the puzzle was fundraising, because we know that if we are going to bring our message to the masses, if we are going to help expand and grow upon the movement, revenue and resources have to be a part of that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're dirty money grubbing, evil people. A super PAC is strictly the legal entity, again, that the government has allowed us to utilize for those functions.
Right. It's important to point out that super PACs wouldn't exist if it weren't for the government requiring them to exist.
Exactly.
And, there's a famous phrase in politics: money is the mother's milk of politics, and data its daily bread.
Exactly.
We have to have that pairing of the money in order to be able to, find effective advocacy, and the data to tell us what is effective.
Well, and to your point about data, Dan, that's where that third spoke in the wheel comes into play. So the corporation that's in the middle between the two organizations serves as a firewall, creating very clear distinction between the nonprofit activities and the super PAC activities. But that corporation is responsible for collecting data, analyzing data, and then really understanding our market. And our hope is, and I'm working with a separate team on this, again, that's separate and distinct from the nonprofit, that we can offer consulting services, market research, and access to data for candidates, for groups, and for small businesses who want to work within or support the liberty movement. So this three-prong approach, a nonprofit 501c4, a super PAC, and then an entity clearly in between, providing distinction, but providing critical services, right? Market research, data analytics. Again, that's the bread that we all will thrive on. I saw that as the necessary infrastructure to help support the movement and our growth.
So I think one of the things, people are thinking about, but I'm sure that, for a lot of people, and I can sort of see, you guys are welcome to comment on here. People are sending me personal messages, comment on the Facebook stream or the YouTube stream. Is that, there's a question, isn't the market already crowded? Aren't there all sorts of people who are out there who are doing this? There are some organizations. Go ahead, Lauren.
Well, I was going to say, the answer is yes, and we want to support all of them. So yeah. We'll see this as we move through the slides. Thinking about a crowded marketplace in the liberty movement is crowded with content creators. And right. I saw this really early on, that all of you were creative and passionate, and you're creating podcasts and newsletters and blogs and, let her speak rallies and protests and these great ideas. But you didn't have anyone supporting your efforts. So when we think about that crowded marketplace, the answer is yes, and we want to support all of them.
And so that's, one of the other things about it is that we're creating a very experienced team. And, I'll talk a little bit about, my plan actually after my term was done as executive director was to go back to tech. I have this house in Fiji that is calling me, and there's a financial requirement to get there. But, there is a need, and there's a need for us to grow the movement. And I am, but let's put false modesty aside here. I'm really good at helping people figure out how to do things.
You are.
While I was with the Libertarian Party, membership grew 50% in a 6-month period, a 6-quarter period.
Yep.
That's, it's astonishing growth, but it's because it's specifically what we focused on. We knew how to do it, but we also, coming from the, a tech background and agile background, we had metrics along the way to measure what we were doing. Are we succeeding? Are we failing?
Yes.
And that's something that I want to give that expertise to other people as they start running their liberty organization.
Yes.
I want to come in and say, look, I can give you some advice on how to see what you're doing. Are you succeeding? Are you failing? Are you nimble enough that if this path you're taking fails, you're going to have another place to go? I was just called in to talk to a candidate running for a race that's going to be huge in 2021. And, I was just called in sort of as a friend saying, hey, can you help talk to us about this sort of thing? And I got in there. And then afterwards, they said to me, like, Dan, that was invaluable. Our campaign is 100% better because of that hour you spent talking to us.
Yep.
I'm like, I want to do that for everybody.
Exactly.
I want everybody to be better. I want to find a way. And, I recognize the things that I do, and there's a million things that are important to people that I'm not good at. I want to make sure that People for Liberty is going to have that skill set as well.
Yes.
Because, there's the one uniform issue. So we talked about this. So when I was executive director, one of the problems we had was the candidates who started running for president in 2019 said, why isn't the Libertarian Party promoting our debates more? Because we've done these debates. In fact, one I'd helped organize at the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts in the summer of 2019. So really early on. I said, here's the thing. If we want to promote stuff, it has to look great. Okay. We hurt our brand if we send out a video of, a bunch of people sitting around handing one microphone from one person to the next. And so I said, here, let's have these criteria. But in order to do it, we spearheaded a program where the Libertarian Party contracted with a company, a libertarian company, to say, okay, you have the capacity to do a professional job filming.
Yes.
Okay. We want the state party putting it on to provide a lectern. So everybody is standing up on a stage, a professional sound system. So everybody has their own microphone, lighting, et cetera. And we gave all these criteria. And then the LNC committed to spending money
Yes.
to help facilitate that, because it doesn't happen without money. And so, first of all, you want to bring a professional to shoot your debate, your event, anything like that. You get what you pay for. Okay. If you get a volunteer, if you're really lucky, you might get a very talented volunteer. But if you hire a professional, you're always going to get a professional.
Yes.
And so bringing that in, we need to put more money. Everybody needs to put more money into the libertarian ecosystem. And I'm not saying this because I want people to give money to People for Liberty. I want everybody in the liberty movement to be getting paid so that we start producing professional looking stuff.
Yes. We
And
cannot
by the
be
end,
relying on volunteers. And the fact is, we also want to support one another's businesses. We are the party of small businesses. Let's put our money where our mouth is and start hiring those liberty-minded small businesses.
exactly. We know one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating, something that People for Liberty is going to be addressing in the next month,
Yes.
is a lot of times people will say to me, "Hey, Dan, do you know anybody who is good at building websites?"
Yeah. There's entire groups on Facebook dedicated to finding a web developer and finding a marketer. And within our ecosystem of organizations, we hope that we can help them elevate their consulting services through the corporation. But also, when we think about the 501c4, Dan, you and I have talked about this, we envision education as a primary focus, but also this incubator and accelerator, which, is part of that. And we're looking at a hybrid Chamber of Commerce, community foundation type of educational organization. And your Liberty University is a piece of that.
Right, exactly. Except that we can't use the phrase Liberty University.
Yeah,
Apparently somebody else is taking it. But, that's so one of the critical things about this. I'm going to tell a little business story from my past. Okay. I used to work at Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm biased because I worked there. Nickname was Man's Greatest Hospital. And one of the things that we did when I first started working there was we just had wide open printing. Anybody could send a thing to the printer and it would print. And that was it. And it was a problem for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a hospital. Okay. HIPAA, you shouldn't leave patient records sitting there on the printer. But number two, our printing costs, and where I worked was a very small facility, our printing costs were over $100,000 a year, which is insane. And so they said, let's come up with a way to start charging people for printing and to cut down and put limits on it and stuff like that. I said, well, let's get a little data first. So we instituted a system where in order to print, you sent a job to the printer. And then when you got to the printer, you had to log in and that released your job and it printed for you right then. So that was great because it stopped us from leaving things on the printer. But it also allowed us to find out who was actually printing.
The data.
Exactly, the data. And so we had some people, most people were not printing a tremendous amount. We had some people, some older faculty members who printed out every email, including if there was an email that replied. Exactly. So they print out all these pages. So after analyzing that, we said, okay, we have this number that is, we said, okay, we're going to give everybody 500 pages a semester. 95% of the people are under 500 pages a semester. And we say, we're going to charge you, everybody gets 500 pages a semester. And we're charging, 1 cent, but we're giving you a credit of $5, which would give you 500 pages. And then anything you print after that, you have to pay 1 cent per page to print. And what we found was that printing reduced by 75%. In fact, nobody went over the quota. Nobody ended up getting charged. And the reason why is because before, when printing was free, it had no value. When we put a value to it, people started to conserve it. And we need to change the liberty economy that there's this expectation that people are going to get all this stuff for free. Because once there's an expectation that you will get paid to do something, and you'll get paid to make a website, you'll get paid to make a graphic, something like that. Then if there is a scarcity, we're libertarians, we understand free market. If there's a scarcity of supply, it will get filled. People will start moving into the field. You won't have a hard time finding somebody who can make a logo, who can make a website, because There
We
will
can.
be just enough people. Exactly.
Well, Dan, I love that you touched on a couple of reasons that we felt strongly that you were the right man for this job. And, one is your background in tech. I'm in tech as well. I'm specifically in media technology, which is what we need. But you and I recognize the necessity for a tech enabled platform and tools to help facilitate some of the processes and programs that we want to roll out. We recognize that we can't do one without the other. And that's another great reason you're a good fit. But as we look at that strategic plan, and I want to offer to everyone, we know we're coming up on the end of our hour, but we've done a couple of strategic planning live streams where we talk through the full plan. We talk about volunteer opportunities. We're going to do another one of those. So if you want to nerd out on this deck with us, if you want to talk about your ideas and where you think you can bring value, we want to hear from you. We want to know your thoughts on this strategic plan that we're developing. We want to know how you can bring value. And something I've learned, people in the liberty movement have no shortage of great ideas. We're looking for people who can help execute. But Dan, back to why you're a great fit. And back to a little bit about your background and what you are excited about. We've talked about a number of things.
Yeah, we did. And I want to follow up on that basic idea of what you were talking about, that, this is a movement that doesn't belong to any one person. It's a movement that we're all in this together. And, one of the things that, the promise of our country. And so, there are a lot of times that being involved in politics, I find it frankly depressing. I don't really like the way politics is. I don't like what it does to us. But I realize that the end game of libertarianism is the end of politics as we know it, because we envision a country in which our politics are so insignificant because everybody has so much liberty that it doesn't matter. America's founded on this idea of, no more kings, no more princes, all of us citizens together. I don't want to say citizens united because that's a country phrase, but all of us citizens together working towards this goal that, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Jefferson's got it right. That's where we started. It shouldn't be that hard to get us back to it, because that is in the DNA of America. That is in the soul of our country. And all we're trying to do right now is to get everybody to think about themselves and everybody else and how the blessings of liberty are what truly enhance their life. And so that's why I wanted to come on board. That's why when, I was privileged to be offered by the board of directors, the executive director position for the people of liberty, I said I'd do it. And it's a prestigious position. I'm flattered to be here, but I'm doing it because I couldn't hate politics so much that I did not love my country more. And so here I am doing my bit for liberty, hoping that you guys are going to join me in it as well. So thank you, Lauren, for, inviting me to come on board with the People for Liberty. It's a name, it's an organization whose name I'm proud to have after my own.
Well, Dan, I know that I'm speaking for our board of directors and for all of our volunteers. We are so excited and thrilled to have you now at the helm, to be able to work beside you and not just under you, but as a team.
Yeah.
And, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more and maybe interview you for their podcast or, talk about you on their blog and learn more, how can they reach you? And what would you say are our next steps for us? I will schedule a strategic planning live stream, again, where we can solicit input from volunteers, but what are next steps with you?
So first of all, the easiest way to get in touch with any of us, I think, via Twitter. You should add us all on Twitter anyway. Yep. People for Liberty. Fish Dan is me. Lauren M. Postler is Lauren, of course. I'm Fish Dan in almost every place you can possibly imagine. So if you see that name anywhere, one of the funniest things that happened was, when I took the executive director job, 1 million people sent me Facebook friend requests.
Yep.
But what I wasn't expecting is on Steam, I got about 1,000 requests to be gaming friends with people on Steam, which I thought was really fun. But that's one of the things I just love about
Yeah.
libertarians. Easy way to reach us. Also, the website, peopleforliberty.org. That's a really important thing. There's a sign up there. We have a newsletter, contact list, all those things. Really easy to get in touch with me, get in touch with Lauren. People who had contact with me over the course of my tenure with the Libertarian Party, ask them. They'll tell you. I respond to a lot of stuff. There was during the convention, we had 1,000 people at the same time online, various points in time, emailing me, contacting me on Slack, whatever. We are, I'm very responsive. We will have other methods as well. Slack is probably not going to be a long-term solution. Those of you who know what's happened to Slack from technical side, we're looking for a better alternative. We'll have something like that. But for right now, I mean, it sounds crazy to say, websites old fashioned or emails out of dated or Twitter is old school communication. Those are the things that work really well.
Send us a message on Twitter. And to your point, Dan, about email, you are Dan at people4liberty.org. I'm Lauren at people4liberty.org. Drop us a note. We want to talk. We want to connect. Don't rely on Facebook, although it's one of the many ways, but we're looking forward to continuing the conversation with each of you.
Right. And so to that end, thank you so much, Lauren, for this wonderful time. Thank everybody. Thank you, everybody who's watching. My name is Dan Fishman, and I'm proud to say I am the executive director of the People for Liberty.